Welcome to Week 3's Faculty Guidance. This week I'm going to talk about a technology trend called cloud computing. Cloud computing is one of those terms that most people think they understand, but once you ask them to define it, they have a hard time with it. So this week I want to take some of the mystery out of cloud computing and explain what it is. Cloud computing has several characteristics. The first characteristic is that the resources in cloud computing are remote from the end user. Now, what do I mean by the resources? Well, you see in this slide with the picture of the cloud, there are servers. These servers are usually sitting in a data center somewhere in the world. On top of the servers are applications. Sometimes storage is involved in a cloud configuration, not always, but most of the time it is. However, the most important part of a cloud computing is the virtual desktop. What this means is the virtual desktop is displayed on the end user device. The server serves information to this desktop. So all the processing and all the applications are coming from the servers in the data center to a virtual desktop. Now, this virtual desktop can be on your smartphone, it can be on your tablet, it could be on a laptop or a desktop, and actually it could even be on a printer. So first and foremost, the remote resources are a characteristic of cloud computing. Secondly, these resources from the end user, from your smartphone, your tablet, your desktop, or your laptop, are accessed through the internet. So the end user accesses the server and the application through the public internet. Another characteristic is that a cloud computing environment is sold or used on demand. That is, it's always there and always available. And it's managed by others, usually not by the end user. Another characteristic is that it's scalable. By scalable, I mean that you can incrementally add resources or decrease resources. You can instantaneously add another server. You can instantaneously add or deplete storage as you need it. You can add or decrease applications. So it's very dynamic in nature. And finally, the last characteristic of a cloud computing is that the end user doesn't own the resources. They use the resources and they access these resources, but they very rarely use these resources. Now, this is a very simplified version of cloud computing. If you read about it on the internet, there are much more complicated definitions and many more characteristics. But in my mind, these are the major characteristics of a cloud environment. So what are some examples of a cloud environment? Well, you actually use, most of you have used the cloud environment every day. Gmail is a perfect example of a cloud environment, as would be Hotmail or even Yahoo Mail. These are applications that you access from your desktop at a remote site that you're not in charge of. Other types of applications include backup and storage. I think we're all familiar with Dropbox and iCloud. Applications such as NetSuite or Salesforce. Social media is very big in the cloud computing environment. Facebook, Flickr, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, those are all what are considered cloud-based applications, as are some productivity software, Google Calendar, Google Docs, stuff we have used in this class. In addition, you could even consider Ashford University's site to be a cloud site, in that you use it, but it's not necessarily under your control. This slide, I'm going to show some of the configurations of cloud computing. Now, at first, this is a pretty busy slide, but I'll break it down for you, and it should be a little easier to understand. On the right-hand side, we have what's known as the public cloud or the external cloud. These are off-premise. When we talk about the cloud, those are resources somewhere in a data center. You access those through the public internet. And as you can see from those buildings, there's a couple of black lines going from the cloud. Those black lines represent the public internet that you transfer information between the cloud and the end user. Now, in addition to a public or external, there are also private or internal clouds. A private or an internal cloud is a cloud that a company puts in place which more or less mimics the public external cloud system. Even though the company runs it, the end user perceives it as a public or external cloud. And the lines that are kind of an orange color going to the buildings, those represent the private cloud and information going between the private cloud and the end user. Then there's a hybrid type of cloud system. This is when the public cloud and the private cloud are used both to deliver data. So at times the company may get certain applications off of the public cloud, but they may keep their data on the internal cloud for security reasons. There is a fourth type of cloud configuration called a community cloud, but that's kind of beyond the scope of what we need to understand for this lecture. In addition to configurations, there are cloud computing service models. On the left is the on-premise. Now this is not a cloud solution, but this is your classical, typical servers within the company. And you see that each of the blocks are kind of a dark orange in color. So you go from the data center to the servers, to virtualization, to the operating system, data, and applications. All of these are under the purview and the operation of the company. As we move to the right, the first type of cloud service model is called an infrastructure as a service. Here, the company is no longer managing the data center, the storage, or the servers, or the virtualization. They are, however, in charge of the operating system, the corporate data, and the applications. So this is kind of a mixture of an on-premise and a cloud type of solution, which is called infrastructure. Some examples of the infrastructure are Amazon EC2, Rackspace, and Blue Cloud. As we continue to move to the right, the next type of service model is called platform as a service. Here you can see that the data center, servers, virtualization, and now the operating system are under the operation of the remote service provider, no longer under the operation of the company. The data is a little bit different color because this may or may not be part of a platform as a service. At times companies do take their data and ship it off to the service provider. Other times they keep it in-house. Applications, though, in a platform as a service are always under the purview of the company. And finally, we have software as a service. You can see with software as a service, the data center, servers, virtualization, operating system, data, and even the applications are no longer controlled by the end user. But these are all out on the cloud, being managed by a third party. And some of the examples of software as a service: Salesforce, NetSuite, Dropbox, Gmail, any of the mail systems are all part of the software as a service. What are some of the pros and cons of cloud computing? Well, there are definitely more advantages than there are disadvantages. However, the disadvantages really need to be looked at and weighed before any company moves towards a cloud. First and foremost disadvantage of cloud computing is downtime. And I have last mile in parentheses. What I mean by this, the last mile is the internet connection between either your resident or your company and your service provider. So if you have a DSL line from AT&T or a cable line from Comcast, those are the last mile. And the issue becomes if the last mile goes down, that is if AT&T or Comcast can't get internet to your resident or your business, you cannot get to the internet and you have no resources. So if those are down, cloud computing does you no good because everything in cloud computing is remote. So companies go to great extreme and great length to make sure that they have redundancy in place so that their internet never goes down. The next disadvantage is latency. Latency is the period between when you push a button on your keyboard and you see a response on your screen. At times with a very busy internet, the latency can be quite long and quite disturbing because you could type something and not see it show up for a while. Normally that doesn't happen in today's environment, but there is a potential for it. Another disadvantage is data transfer. If you're transferring large amounts of data between the on-premise and the cloud provider, this could take a while. And it's not always convenient, and it can clog up the internet. So you've got to be very careful that your bit pipes or your internet connection between your company and your cloud provider is large enough to handle any data transfers. Flexibility can be a disadvantage at times. Now, what I mean by flexibility in this instance is the flexibility to change cloud providers. Once you choose a cloud provider, you're pretty much stuck with that cloud provider because it is a lot of work to go to another cloud provider and to transfer all your applications, all your data, policies, procedures. It's very difficult. So my advice is when you look at cloud providers, make sure that you know and trust the one you're going to go to, and that's going to be a long-term relationship. Security can be a disadvantage because most of the time your data is going to be going between your computer facility and the data center over the public internet. So you or your company needs to take precautions to make sure this data is encrypted and secured. Cost is another issue. And by cost, I mean usually overruns. Most cloud providers give you a set amount of disk space, a set amount of data transfer, a set amount of CPUs. And if you exceed any of these, you're going to get nixed pretty good. Think of it analogous to going over your number of minutes with your cell phone. If you do that, you get hit with a pretty hefty charge. Cloud computing is the same way. While it's an on-demand service, it's still a measured service, and as a metered service, there are limitations to it. So make sure if you go to a cloud provider that there's enough of the resources available to you so that you won't get nixed at the end of the month. Integration can be a problem, and by integration, I mean the integration of various software packages. Because these packages don't reside on your system, it can be difficult at times to integrate them into one homogeneous environment. So when you look at your cloud provider, make sure that you have the ability, if necessary, to integrate certain packages. And finally, support. Because you no longer have an in-house IT team that's going to be as responsive to you, you are going to have an outsourced group that may or may not be as responsive. Therefore, it's really important to look at the service level agreements and the escalation process if something goes wrong. Make sure you know how long it's going to be before they get back to you and start working on your problem. Now, those are the disadvantages. And I don't want to discourage you with the disadvantages. I just want to make you aware of them. I believe, though, that the advantages do outweigh the disadvantages. For the advantages of cloud computing, first and foremost is accessibility. Accessibility is the ability to access your data from any device at any time from anywhere in the world. If you have an internet connection, you can get to your data and your resources through cloud computing. Likewise, mobility. You don't have to be fixed to a certain spot. You can be mobile. You can move around. You can go to your Starbucks and work. You can work at home. You can work in the office, and you'll always have access to the same resources. Your desktop will look identical no matter where you are. A speedy development is important to a lot of companies. By this, I mean it usually takes a lot of time to bring up a new software package. However, with cloud computing, the new packages come up with really a flick of the switch. You just tell your provider, I want SAP, and within 20 minutes, you have access to SAP. No more long implementation processes. It's almost instantaneous. And there is flexibility with cloud computing. And by flexibility in this context, I mean if you need SAP for a month, you bring it up for a month and use it. If you need SAS for a month, you can have it for a month. If you need Word for a couple of weeks, you can have it for a couple of weeks. If you need to bring on a temporary workforce and then let them go again after 3 months, you can give them all the resources they need in that time. So there really is a lot of flexibility with a cloud system. Now, security is a disadvantage, but at the same token, security can be an advantage, especially when it comes to backup. Cloud systems have tremendous backup systems. So your data is always being backed up, which isn't always the case with small to medium companies. The data is not always being backed up. The applications are not always being backed up. So there is that extra security when it comes to cloud and the recovery of data. Cloud computing does have lower maintenance costs because you don't need as many IT people, because you don't need servers or high-end desktops. It's a little bit lower price to run a cloud system, somewhere between 30 to 40, 50% cheaper than an on-premise system. Likewise, disaster recovery. Since none of your data or resources sit in your facility, if a flood would happen in your facility or a fire, nothing is going to get damaged because they all reside in these very secure, very high-tech data centers. And usually cloud providers have more than one data center. So if something happens to one data center, another one takes over automatically. The next advantage is automatic software updates. Cloud providers will always have the latest and greatest software. Now, you can request not to have an automatic update, but most people don't do that. You're paying for the latest and greatest. Why not use it? So there's no waiting around for your IT department to upgrade every computer. They're done instantaneously, and everyone has the latest version of every software product. The next advantage is more for the accountants in the group. This is the OpEx versus CapEx budgets. Companies have two budgets. They have an OpEx budget, which pays for supplies and services, and they have a CapEx budget, which they use to buy depreciable goods. It's an advantage for a company to have an OpEx budget and buy services over a CapEx budget and buy depreciable goods. It comes down to taxes. It's cheaper for OpEx than CapEx in the tax category. The second to last competitive advantage is competitiveness. By competitiveness, I mean that small and medium companies have the flexibility to increase or decrease the resources, add resources, take away resources, change resources on the fly without a large investment. So this can make them, as their markets change or the demographics of their customers change, they can change almost instantaneously and not have to worry about an implementation period or writing off something and getting nixed for it. Finally, they're environmentally friendly. Cloud computing environments share servers and share resources. So on the whole, as an impact to the world, cloud data centers consume less energy than having servers in every location for every person. So what's the future of cloud computing? Well, as you can see from these two charts, it looks pretty bright. It seems that the world is moving towards cloud computing. On the left, we see the projected growth in cloud computing for both public clouds and private clouds. Remember, we talked about them previously. And on the right, we're looking at the projected federal spending on cloud computing. And as you can see, the picture's pretty rosy for all types of cloud computing. But in actuality, there's nothing new under the sun. As you can see from these two quotes, cloud computing really existed in the 1980s. We just called it timeshare. It was a central resource that was shared by a bunch of people on their own terminals somewhere. Now, obviously, the technology has gotten a lot better. It's much more sophisticated, but the concept is still the same. And as the second quote by Larry Ellis shows, it really is just a renaming, that what we called timeshare is now called cloud computing. And I believe he's right, that the computer industry is really good at changing names, calling it something fancy when it's just something that happened yesterday. So given that, as Aldous Huxley would say, technological progress has merely provided us with a more efficient means for going backwards. I hope you enjoyed the week 3 guidance, and I'm looking forward to week 4.